Hold on. All right, you're live.
Okay, so the two topics that I worked on this week and submitted were the topic 7, manipulating CSS class properties, I believe, and then also I did the creating CSS3 transitions and animations in CSS and triggering them with JavaScript. So the examples I ended up finding and going with, basically, with JavaScript, you can either add, styles to elements and then modify those styles through JavaScript based on, all the same stuff we've talked about in the past, where you're using, event triggers and things like that. Or you can do the other one that I saw often used and have an example on is you can have like a class for a certain kind of look, and then you can have a separate class that changes that look, and then you can use JavaScript to switch between those classes on an element. So first one here, if I just use this little color picker, I can change the background of my body of the page here using JavaScript. I can change that CSS style.
Oh, that's cool.
And same thing. And so yeah, and then I can show you what the CSS looks like for this, right? So if I go to JavaScript for this, this first function, basically it takes a chosen color from that picker, and then I do an output of the log just to see what the color ends up being, right? So if I go back here and do a look at the console, I am getting some, how interesting, I'm getting some errors maybe with my next example here. But you can see this is my console output of the color I picked, and then that color then gets applied to the document body style background color, CSS style. So that's how you change that.
That's slick. I like that.
Then I've got this next option where I've got a basic set of text, and I can manipulate and change that text. So I hit this button to change the font size, and I do it to change the font family. But I am getting some sort of error on that, it seems like. So I've got to figure out why, because that should kind of change it to sort of a very like flowy script style font rather than kind of a standard font. But I'm getting an error. Maybe it's because I'm trying to use the Google Fonts and request that, and it's giving me some sort of error on that. So I have to work on that. But,
I noticed it too. I would every time I try to use the Google Fonts, it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, well, it works on my local page. In fact, I can jump over to that. So I go to topic 7 and hit change. You can see there it changes to that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so you can change that to something to look different again using JavaScript. The sky's the limit in terms of things you could do with something like that as well. And then this last example, like I said, this one, the CSS is just basically I have example 1 that's a 100 by 50 pixel box. That's the background color of gold. And then example 3.2 is a different class with a different size box and different background, and then do a border radius to make it look like a circle, right? So I can come in here and hit change the class and change that class automatically. So I'm not like specifying the styles. I'm just saying change to this other class that's already been defined, and then it changes it that way. So
nice.
That's topic 7. Topic 8. Manipulating CSS class properties, right? So I'm already basically manipulating classes that exist in CSS. I'm doing, this is where I'm actually interacting with things like transitions and animations in CSS and then triggering them, right? So I use some of the kind of similar same ideas. So with the same option here to change my background, not only does it change the background, but it actually does a transition from the current background to the new background, right? So I'm using a transition there to change that. The same thing. It'll just, over like 4 seconds, it transitions to that. So
very cool. Very nice.
And then under the reveal text, again, kind of going with the same idea because it kind of applies. I've got the same quote, but it's in a div that I have initially set as a height of 0. And then when I click the slide open button, it adjusts that div to a height of like 100 pixels or 50 pixels, and it transitions over a few seconds to open that up. So it kind of gives you a slide effect there. And then this last one, I've already got this on an animation running. That's basically just telling it to move the square, sort of like in a Pong fashion. And then I can hit this button to add a transition, add an animation to that button. So if I say spin the square, it'll spin the square on top of following the previous.
Pretty cool.
Animation. And then also with JavaScript, you can say like pause. And I don't know why, but I try to do a toggle where I can pause and play the animation, and I have to click it twice the first time to get it to work. But I can pause using JavaScript. I can pause that at any point and then play it again.
That's cool.
So just to show you some of the code for that, right? So again, I've got my initial example is just changing the background color like I did before, but I'm also adding a transition that calls that background with a 3-second linear transition to the other color. So if I go look at that CSS. Yeah, that's actually inserting that background transition right there, calling it background. With the next example, I kind of slide open that box. It's the same thing, right? So I'm adjusting the height to 70 pixels, and I'm setting it to be a transition, right, from whatever it's set at to the new height. So that's what allows you to do that slide open effect. The one thing I think I've seen people kind of use something like this on is you could use like a hover event, and you could basically like hover over different divs, and as you hover over them, they expand, and then when you hover away from them, they collapse again. So it's like you could do some cool maybe navigation bar or something like that, where as you hover over stuff, they expand and then unexpand. And then, for example, 3, like I said, I've got 2 different animations, right? I've got the Pong animation that is basically telling the square to move, from the top left to the bottom middle to the top right, and basically go back and forth and do that forever. And then when I click the button, it triggers the spin animation on top of that also tells it to rotate 360 degrees infinitely. So that's what that does, is that basically instigates the Pong and the spin part of that animation for that. And then this is where I've got that toggle that basically says the running is a keyword that can determine whether your animation is paused or in a pause state or running state. And I can say if it's in a running state, pause it and then change my button value. And then if it's in a pause state, run it and and then change the button value to pause again, right? So that's kind of how that triggers. That's kind of how that defaults back and forth. So when I hit pause, it pauses it and changes it to play and so on. So that's the 2 topics I worked on this last week and got submitted. And they kind of work together, right? They're both sort of the same sort of wheelhouse, but this one actually kind of works with more of the animation side of things. The other one kind of works with just changing the CSS styles using JavaScript. So, does that make sense? Any questions on those or?
No, I like how you did that spin square thing. Because I was thinking about doing some game, and that's I like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like I said, it's kind of, I mean, when you really look at all the options that you get from these. I mean, the sky really is the limit in terms of what you want to come up with. It's just what you can think up and have make sense. You can basically do it with these 13 topics. Are interesting because they all kind of play into each other in the fact that you can really use this to do a lot. I mean, anything you wanted to. You don't have to think of a web page anymore. It's just a basic wall of text. Like you can really make it interactive or animated by some of these features. So.
Sweet deal. Awesome. Thanks, David.
Okay, that's it, guys.